Welcome to the Susan Brender Show. It's all about you, featuring shows on health and wellness, the performing arts, politics, and people who inspire you to be your very best. And now, here's Susan Brender.
And now a word from our sponsors.
Back in my day, to become an author, you had to master your craft. You needed a team that you could trust, a team that would never flinch in battle. Back in my day, you would risk losing your rights and pay outrageous amounts for terrible service. Well, yesterday is not today. Gladiator Publishing Company has a century-long reputation for defending writers and readers and winning awards for their record-setting low-cost services and market sales. They are 75 to 80% more cost-effective and never touch your royalties or copyrights. Go with a publisher that is so transparent that they have their contract on their webpage. Have your book treated with honesty, loyalty, and respect, period. Visit us at gladiatorpublishing.com or text us at 417-291-9162.
I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. Today we're going to be discussing mental health. Mental health just really gets a bad break. When it comes to insurance and when it comes to trying to be put into a situation where you can get help, it's very hard because somehow there just isn't enough insurance to provide for a good mental health situation. My guest today is Kristin Walker, who has been working in the behavioral health field for over 20 years. Her consulting firm, everything from EHR, focused solely on helping behavioral health organizations navigate the often arduous task of determining if their current EHR is sufficient or they need to acquire a new system. Now, there's so much in her bio that I want to tell you about, but before we start, I think it's very important to ask Kristen, when I just mentioned that it's really difficult, Kristen, to put yourself in a situation where you get the right help, why is that a problem? What is the difficulty behind that?
Good question. The difficulty really is the lack of funding in the mental health field. It's of all the healthcare specialties, it's really still treated like the redheaded stepchild, and I feel sorry for all redheaded stepchildren, by the way, but it's still not as notable and taken as seriously as all of, bunion health or colon health, and that's starting to change, thank goodness, but the funding to support it hasn't caught up with the change that we're seeing. So there's more awareness, but government funding initiatives to make it affordable and have better resources and access to care hasn't caught up yet with the advocacy.
I don't understand something, and you can fill me in on this because this is your specialty, and needless to say, I'm sure our audience wants to know about this. Now, what do you attribute to the fact that there isn't enough initiatives to really help people when they're in distress? Because I'd like to know, what's the statistic, and you must know this, of people facing a mental illness?
I wish I had statistics for you, but they're all over the map, and every day they change. So I don't have a hardcore statistic for you, but I can tell you this. It is still one of the most stigmatized physical health issues that's out there. And when we talk about mental health, we're talking about addiction, or they now call substance use disorder, and to things like depression and anxiety. So it's better in terms of understanding about, hey, everyone, I don't care, the Dalai Lama has suffered from mental health issues. So this is, everyone has anxiety or panic at some point in their life, and that's your mental health being affected. So there was all this stigma around it. Don't say anything about it because then you're quote unquote crazy. That's become less and less because it's just part of the human condition. So now we have all these celebrities talking about it and, just making it so that everyone can just talk about what's already been going on forever. So that's great. But the next one that's so highly stigmatized is if you have a substance use disorder issue. So if you're in addiction to drugs, alcohol, porn, whatever that addiction may be, food, that's highly, highly stigmatized as well. So the funding for both of those things just has not, like I said, caught up to the level of awareness and comfort level of everybody now surrounding those two things.
All right, so it's very important. That was a very interesting answer, because the reality is that, yes, there are people who are very popular in the entertainment field, in the athletics, you name it, and they're there, and they do suffer. And that is important for us to know, because some people have said to me, they say, you know what, it's usually poor people, it's people in the military, it's people who can't really express or have the kind of help they want. But the reality is that it happens to everybody.
Every single person on this planet, unless you live in a bubble, but the reality is you probably have separation anxiety and attachment disorder if you lived in a bubble, so there you've got a mental health issue too.
Sure, that's right. Now, you're the host of a mental health news radio network, and how did you get started with that, and what do you exactly do? Do you do a show interviewing people who deal with anxiety and deal with all these other depressions and PTSD and you name it? So tell us a little bit about your radio show.
Sure. I started my show, Mental Health News Radio, about 4 years ago, maybe 4.5 years ago, and it was just a hobby. I never thought of turning it into a business, and I just interviewed everybody from my mailman who has bipolar disorder to a CEO of a mental health company and why he was in the business to counselors. And it was really a love letter to people that choose to go into this profession, because I had received so much help from mental health professionals as I was growing up, and I just wanted to, tell them thank you for choosing to do this as a career, because no one gets into the field because they want to have a new BMW every year. You get into it because you have the heart of an advocate, typically. So that's how my show started, and then it got more and more popular, and I have a really good business mind. At least I think it's good anyway. And I spoke at a lot of conferences about mental health technology, and while I was at these venues, I would ask them, can I do a podcast from here? So I would get to podcast and interview all the keynote speakers, and so we just kept getting more and more and more popular, but growing very organically. I didn't have any money to spend on, doing anything, and then we started having people come to me and companies and say, hey, will you do a commercial about us? And I went, sure. And then after I had that for a while, guests came and said, listen, we want a podcast. We don't know what we're doing. Will you create a network? And I was like, no, I don't even know how to do that. That's so much work. Forget it. But I finally said yes. And so Mental Health News Radio Network was born. Now I have my show, Mental Health News Radio, and I continue to do that. And then I have the network, which has 27 shows now, and we started just over a year ago, and I thought if we had 5 shows by the end of our first year, I'd be a happy camper, and we had 18 within 6 months. So it's completely taken off.
Relatively new, and
absolutely completely new. The network is, yeah.
Okay, so this is interesting to me because, needless to say, I'm doing a show which is also a podcast. But the reality also is that there are times that people kind of try to get in touch with me to ask me different things. I'm curious, what are the main questions that you get on your show, and do you take questions on your show?
I don't do live shows anymore because my shows are most of the time, sometimes they're silly, but most of the time they're pretty deep. We're talking about someone that's a sexual abuse survivor and has PTSD, or, we're talking about someone who was schizophrenic or is schizophrenic. They're very deep topics. So doing live shows does not lend itself to getting to a place of comfort where they'll really share what I want them to share, because the idea of the show is also to be for real about what's going on. It's not to present a persona that everything's fine and whitewashed. No, I want people, if they're in trauma and they're doing a show in the midst of that trauma, we of course make sure they're okay, but I want people to hear that this is what it sounds like. This is what it feels like, because that's what people resonate with. Oh, I felt like that too. Oh my gosh, it's okay.
Well, let me interrupt you for a second. So you're saying that your goal, if you will, is to try to get people to kind of understand what the issues of mental health really are. Now, I'm curious about something. PTSD is a problem that we're really having a lot of, and often I hear from people who have it that they try to go on disability, and it's very difficult for them to do that, and there is not enough professionals in the military to help them, and so you're seeing a lot of people committing suicide. I mean, they say every day there's a few people who are just committing suicide. Now, you have a sense, and you've met people, and you know the situation. So what would you tell people out there about PTSD and how to kind of, get the help that they need and the information that will set them on the right path, rather than going backwards and trying to, unfortunately, kill themselves?
Well, the hardest thing about it is it's so isolating, and you don't want to reach out. And what I found with listening to podcasts is you can be in the middle of your trauma, and the thing that you need, something that helps you pull out of it, get you out of where your brain goes and where your body goes when you're in the middle of a traumatic episode. And it doesn't mean that something's happening to you right then, there's not a bomb going off right then, of course. It's just that you're reliving a flashback of what has happened to you in the past, or you're just feeling overwhelmed with anxiety, and you can't do anything, but you can turn on and listen to someone talking about what you're going through. And that's very private. No one knows what you're listening to, so it's not like you're watching a TV show about depression and people can see what you're doing. You can be sitting on a plane and be in the midst of having a panic attack and turn on a radio show, a podcast, and listen to it, and just hearing someone else's voice talk about this kind of thing helps you calm down and get out of that groove that your brain goes to when it's in trauma. Does that make sense?
It sounds very sensible, frankly. And interestingly enough, there are a lot of alternatives that people are now available to people, like meditation, yoga, deep breathing, things of that nature. What do you think about those things?
Anything and everything. I mean, there's no one way is the only way to combating something like PTSD or complex PTSD. It comes from multiple fronts, the healing. So it's therapy, one-on-one, it's group therapy, if that works for you. It's yoga, it's meditation, it's running, it's eating the right foods at the right times of the day, it's sleeping if you need to sleep. I mean, it's reaching out to friends. It's a combination, and everybody that goes through this finds what combination works for them, or at least that's what we try to foster. That's what I try to do with the show. Here's everybody I can get my hands on. Pick which ones you like.
Well, that's pretty generous of you. I think that's a great idea and a great way to kind of get people to kind of control what unfortunately is like being in a black hole. And I think
absolutely.
Yeah, and let's talk about that for a minute. Depression. Depression has existed forever. I mean, needless to say, we didn't know and we didn't understand it very much, and people used to attribute the fact that that person may be, crazy, as you said before, or just something really wrong with them. But it's such I hate to use the word popular, but what would be a good word to use? It's so... what do you say about depression, for example?
Well, it's another thing that hits people differently and in different ways, and it's a lot of belief is around that it's anger turned inward, and so and then it becomes biochemical, and becomes part of your makeup, and you can also inherit genes that will, maybe you're someone that wouldn't have been likely to get depression, but if you were born into that gene pool, it's any kind of stress in your life is going to lead you possibly towards suffering from this. So, depression is just that it's not, sadness is part of it, but it's sadness taken to the nth degree. It's a sadness you can't shake off.
Yeah. And it's really, it's pretty horrible for most people. Now, I want to get involved a little bit, or start to talk a little bit about kids, because before you were talking a little about drugs and addiction, I happen to be, my office is in a place called Delray Beach, Florida, which happens to be the place where there are so many recovery centers, and it's almost shocking the number of people that are suffering from addictions. So I'm interested in understanding, if you were in front of a group of parents, for example, what would you tell them about how to be aware that there is something going on in their kids' lives?
Well, how would I start that? I would, look for signs like, are they behaving differently? Are they hanging out with a different crowd? Are they isolating themselves? Are they lying more than usual? I mean, that's sort of a norm for teenagers, but, it's just, is their behavior different than what it's been? Are they more aggressive than they have been before? And, talk to their teachers and see if they're noticing a change in grades. I mean, how they look, their appearance. I know for me, I didn't care about washing my hair. I didn't care about my clothing. I wanted to sleep all the time. So, those are symptoms and signs that you can look and see, is this normal teenager, or is this something I need to pay more attention to?
Are there movies and programs on TV that are kind of informational and educational for people who are suffering from these addictions? Because what we're talking about, for example, if I watch Netflix or I watch TV, what I notice is that everybody is smoking there. They're drinking. They're taking drugs, opiates, which are really, really popular now. And sadly enough, doctors are not treating it the way they should. They're just giving out more medication and more medication. So how do you feel about that?
Well, in terms of TV shows, I mean, what I like is that more and more shows are incorporating mental health into their programs. So not enough, and certainly not mainstream, but if they, because honestly it's a TV show, they want to get ratings, so why have someone who's depressed, be a character on a show? I mean, I get it, but there are shows that are coming out on network TV, as an example, where a doctor has high-functioning autism. So, and that's a mental health condition. So there's hope that that's coming about, but we're still not quite there yet in terms of what we see, in terms of television programs. The space where people talk about it and there are shows talking about it are podcasts. I mean, that's the medium for people to just say what they want to say. It's not restricted like a network TV show or a movie or what have you. So that's why I like this medium.
Yeah. It's very helpful to be prepared. Having, say, for example, a checklist of the things you want to know before you have a meeting with any team involved in care and recovery. And if you were to make out a checklist, okay, we're going to put you in this particular position because you just have so much information and understanding of mental disease. So give me kind of a checklist that people have to kind of put together so they can get the best possible treatment and the best possible care.
Oh, boy. It depends on what that treatment is for.
Tell me. It's not an issue.
Well, it depends on what the treatment is for. Is this for just, something like chronic depression, or are we talking about opioid addiction? Or
All right, let's start with chronic depression because that is something that people all around us have either suffered from or unfortunately, there's triggers that are causing it and they just don't know what to do about it.
Right. For depression, I would look for what the credentials are of the facility. Is it a long-term care facility or a short-term care facility? Do they have psychiatrists, people who can prescribe medication on their team? I would do a Google search on whoever those prescribers are. There's lots of websites that talk about doctors and, if they're friendly or if they don't have a good bedside manner. And when you're depressed, you need someone who has empathy and who is able to show it. If I had a doctor that was, more like a surgeon that doesn't tend to have more of those bedside mannership skills, and they were my depression treatment doctor, I'd be like, I'm out. You're not the right person for me. So, doing a little more of a deep search on using this great thing called Google to go and find out more of a background before you enter a facility, and don't totally take the facility's word for things. Look to see if they have their own podcasts. I mean, that's a great thing that we're finding is a lot of treatment centers for depression and or substance use are coming to us and saying, hey, we want to do our own podcast. Will you produce it for us? And I love that because they're really like okay with, hey, these are our people. Listen to what they say. And They get personal. And that's so good because forever, and I'm 48, so I've been around a long enough time in this field to see how it has changed. Forever, there was here's my clipboard, and that is what is between me, the doctor, and you, the patient. And that clipboard almost doesn't exist anymore, which is awesome.
Yeah, sounds great. Now, let's talk a little bit about getting help. If people, they're just suddenly put into the situation where they're unfortunately, suffering, and they just don't know what to do. I mean, there's a lot of people whom I've spoken to who, look at me and they say, well, I'm feeling this terrible feeling and I don't know who to contact. I don't know, how the treatment is, and also the stigma issue, which is, how do I, do I want to go see a psychiatrist? Because if people know that I'm doing that, they're going to think I'm crazy. Again, back to the crazy thing. And what about medications? I mean, do you feel that people should get involved with different kinds of medications, or should they take alternatives? What's the first step? Let's talk about that.
Well, the first step is really just get on Google and find, something local to you. You can type in depression anxiety therapist, and there's any number of things that will pull up for you to go make some phone calls. And if you want, you can listen to we have 27 shows on our network at mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com where you can listen to psychiatrists, counselors, coaches, advocates, and get a feel for what we ask, because there's a whole array of different things. In terms of medication, that's really between the consumer and the facility and their doctor. If they'll ask a list of questions to see if medication is warranted or if you should go down an alternative path. That's something that you'd figure out with your provider.
So you're saying that there have been great strides in this field.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there are plenty of treatment centers that offer, medication management if needed, and then also a more holistic approach where they offer, vitamins and supplements and meditation and yoga, and it takes a village. I mean, they will figure out which thing is going to be the best thing for you. It's no longer, you're nuts, lock you up, let's give you some, some kind of medication treatment and you're done and that's it. That just isn't that way anymore. The field is so vast that most places, that are new out there doing this are really looking at, hey, whatever's going to work for you, let's do that.
Right. Yeah, I hear you. Now, you got started because of your situation. Am I correct? Because I really didn't know that you might have been kind of dealing with some horrible situations. Tell us a little story, something that you think stands out and will give a lot of the people who listen to our show a little bit of hope.
Sure. I mean, if we go back to the beginning, I dealt with two parents with disorders, personality disorders, and a family rife with mental illness. So, I just was born into that, and I dealt with being molested by my father when I was young, and so, that was, I was ripe for depression. It already was in part of my gene pool, and then add severe, early childhood trauma on that, and, that was like throwing kerosene on a fire. So I was never hospitalized. I should have been, but the neglect, because my parents also suffered and went untreated for years, and are still, in some ways not treated. It was really up to me to figure out what the heck I was going to be able to do for myself. So I did get some help. I'm not saying I didn't get help, but I had to, things were often left to my own devices, and thank goodness. I'm a big one for ask questions. Ask questions. I will get up and talk in front of anybody and speak about things. So I was speaking about sexual abuse and signs to look for in children when I was like 16 and 17 years old. Wow. And that's just me. And little did I know I was preparing myself to do what I'm doing now at 48. But that's a little bit of my story anyway. But I certainly have struggled with depression on and off my entire life, PTSD, all kinds of things like that. But I mask it so well because that's what I watched my parents do, that a lot of people wouldn't know, or because I always had a job and always was starting a company and blah, blah, blah. It didn't look like I really had mental health problems until I realized, okay, I'm just doing what everyone else does. I'm just hiding things, and I'm just happen to be really good at it, because the more I talk about this, the more I meet other CEOs or someone that works at the grocery store or someone who's not working because they can't work. I mean, it's the most leveled playing field ever when we're talking about mental health. Yeah. It's just that we need to be talking about it.
Oh, absolutely. And what about autism? You just mentioned autism, and I happen to be working on a very special project dealing with people of all ages, and I'm teaching them how to be podcasters, because I think it's really important that they have an opportunity to kind of, get their egos a little bit out there and just improve their lives with this new skill. And I'm very surprised when I talk to people who are autistic, and depending on where they are on the spectrum, wow, they have so much potential. So it is a mental disease, but nobody knows why. And have you done any research on this, or what's your thoughts about giving people with autism a little bit of something that they could do with their lives instead of people looking at them and thinking, again, they're nuts?
Well, I mean, I'm so steeped in it. I mean, my program director's 6-year-old son has autism, and we're doing a podcast with a wonderful autism center called Springbrook Behavioral Health, and we're doing a show called Converge Autism Radio. So, I mean, we're well steeped in the field, and I've experienced everything from someone with, high-functioning autism to someone that, is 40 years old and they can't speak and they have to, stay in a full-time care in order to deal with autism. So it's another one of those things where it's very much like the human condition. It shows up in different flavors in different people. Mm-hmm. And there are plenty of people that have autism that, are like, I interviewed a doctor who treats kids and adults with autism, and he is autistic. So
right. We've heard the same thing. And
it really depends. It is. It's wonderful. And it's more about how we keep trying to make them change so that we can quote unquote help them. And the reality is, no, we need to change.
That's right.
in order to be able to speak to them, because oftentimes they're exceedingly bright and are more highly developed than neurotypicals, which is what you and I would be, than we are, and we just don't get them because they're brighter than we are.
No, Kristen, I'm going to tell you just a little story because I think it's important for our audience to know a little bit about what you're discussing. And there's a very, 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 and I'm just going to keep on saying very exciting thing that I'm involved with, which is with an organization called ELS, and it's the School of Excellence. And all the people who go to that school are autistic. Now, interestingly enough, when I walked in to meet the director, just discuss what I'm doing, there was a man at the desk, a young man. I'd say he was about 30 years old, and he was very polite to me. He told me, just wait, sit there, and he's going to find the person and, get me into the place. And then the woman whom I met, who's the director and a fabulous person, Marlene Soletto is her name, and she said to me, you see the guy sitting at the desk? She said, you know what he keeps on talking about for years? She said he's talking about he wants to be the host of a show, albeit whether it's TV or radio. And needless to say, he really has a passion for this. So I went out and I said, I understand that you have a passion. He said, you know what he said to me? I want to be the next Larry King.
Good for him.
That's right, and he's going to be one of our first people who we're going to teach how to do a podcast with.
Well, if he wants to have it on my network, give him my information. We would love to have him.
I certainly would love to do that as well, sure. Now, we're just going to finish up now, so I always like to give my guests the last word. What would you want to tell our audience?
Oh, I'd want to say please stop defining mental health as other. It's really you. It's all of us. It's not those people. It's us. So getting out of that mindset of, oh, yeah, I know those people that have mental health issues and they really suffer. Change the language around that to say we all suffer from mental health issues at one time in our lives or not. I think that inclusion, and meaning including yourself, is the first step towards breaking any kind of stigma.
How do they get in touch with you?
Anyone, if they want to type really for a long time, they can type mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com. But if they don't want to type, they can put in mhnrnetwork.com, and that'll take them to the same place, which shows you my show and everybody else's show on the network.
Well, there you go. So today my guest has been talking about a very important subject, which is mental health. And I think it's very important that everyone in the audience listen to this, pass on the word that this organization exists, and start getting involved a little bit and changing sort of your attitude toward mental health, which is that, oh my goodness, it exists, but not in my family, which you just heard. It probably exists all over the place. So
probably exists with you.
That's true. That's true, and believe me, I know it. So my guest today has been Kristin Walker, and she's the CEO of Everything EHR and the CEO of MHNR Network, which is the Mental Health News Radio. Thank you, Kristin, for being on the Susan Brender Show. It's been great.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Susan Brender Show. To be a guest, email sebrender@yahoo.com.